So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about making mistakes, and honestly, it's okay to make mistakes. In fact, I'd prefer that you do make mistakes. Well, at the start when you're learning the game, at least. So here, completely brick. This is probably the best play. So just set everything and wait for a starter to power through like my opponent's hand traps, I guess. But yeah, small misplay by my opponent here. You just use changeover in the imperm column. Yeah, you could be testing for solemn technically because you can return parlor here, and then you could I guess um use changeover to send two of your dragon made monsters to make the fusion, and then you can make the fusion using the cards in the graveyard as well, and you could get a omni negate here, and you could summon like another fusion the next turn with the effective lady. But we're not doing that. So that indicates to me that the fusion they were trying to make, it's genuinely not that important. No idea what it is though, but alright. Just an imperm. Set pass, nothing else to be done, alright. The only mistake I made here was deck building, I suppose, and having True Awakening. That's the only thing I might consider misplay, but you know, sometimes you open hands like this. But anyways, Draco Tail Flame to negate Lockdown. Cool. And then we have Ketu Draco Tail adding 5 mana. Normal summoning, Parlor. Parlor effect. Imperm. And this is where you chain 5 mana to attempt to dodge, but I have the called by. So I'll just call by the 5 mana. Parlor does not resolve. Or Ditch It does not resolve. And then here we go changeover. Activate changeover in the imperm column for the second time. And it's kind of annoying that it does that. Kind of want to go into settings real quick. So let's go back into that again. And we can say, honestly, that that misplay that my opponent did was not that bad. Unless they actually do it again in a future duel, in which case, damn. All you need to do to beat this guy is apparently set your imperm in the middle column. But, alright. If you go to... Well, we're not in game, so I don't think we can change it here, can we? Let's see. Automatically display card descriptions, yada yada. Nope. Can't change it in here. Let's try going into a solo mode duel, I guess. We'll go into my favorite danger solo gate, I suppose. We don't have a deck. I guess we can use the loner. It doesn't matter. Okay. What was this list again? I think it was like cooking a little bit. Like, very, very small amount. Thunder, Dragon, Danger. That's like fine. Anyway. If we go to dual settings, we have self-chain, activation confirmation, we have all this stuff. I believe there is auto card position, which decides where to place cards on the field. I don't know how that works, but if they were manually putting the card into the imperm column, that's crazy talk. I don't think there's any chance that this was happening. Like, there's no way you manually put it into the glowing imperm column twice. We're going to give our opponent the benefit of the doubt here and say that they just simply had their card position setting to auto, and after that duel, they should change it, and they'll never do this again. Hopefully. So, real quick, let's see. I think I can manipulate it. I'll just try to remember to change this back later. Card position, auto. So let's test this out. So let's set trade in, and we're going to do, I guess we can do, well, Thunder Dragon Dark doesn't really matter here, does it? Actually, if we do it in chain, it matters. Does it? No, it doesn't. Oh, and hit Danger Nessie, exactly the one I wanted to see hit. Okay. And then it immediately put Tsuchinoko in the middle column. Well, actually, we don't know where it would have put our back row card if there's like an imperm or something. So let's just reroll hand. Because I already put it in the middle. Let's see if it activates our spells in the middle. Okay, we have a Monster Reborn. All we need to do is not hit Monster Reborn. Anything but Monster Reborn, and it works. Okay, Chupacabra, good enough. When we do this, we just select position and immediately goes to it. Okay. Oh, activate Monster Reborn, immediately goes to the middle. Yeah, I think it was this setting. For sure. That's what our opponent must have had. Because there's no way anyone is dumb enough to activate like that this many times. And I might have to check these settings again later. I think I saw some new settings from when I last went to this menu. So card position, manual. At the beginning of the duel, auto, confirm activation, do not confirm activation. What's this about? You will automatically receive an activation confirmation based on the timing set for each card. Okay. I think that's fine to have that set to auto, because I can still go take over and change to the on setting if I just see a card that I want to activate immediately in like draw phase or something. Well, okay. So the important thing here is mostly just adaptation and just being able to know what mistake you made and recognizing your mistakes. So as long as you do that, you should be pretty solid and you're always improving. And well, just saying this isn't that good. I guess, it's just not very quantifiable. So let's put it this way. Yu-Gi-Oh has an insane amount of legal actions that you can take, and honestly, sometimes it does matter and it could be game deciding. So we'll say in this case we will do normal summon like Sangan or something, right? Sure. And we have a few plays with Sangan, I guess, let's say. We could normal summon Sangan. We could set Sangan. Or even better yet, we could look at Called by the Grave and go through what we're allowed to do with Called by. So, well, you could set Called by the Grave. You could activate Called by the Grave. Then there's actually a secret third option where you don't use Called by the Grave and you do not set Called by the Grave, which is actually useful against a few certain decks, like we'll say Labyrinth. So let's say, for example, you don't have any options for the Labyrinth hand traps or the guys that activate in hand. Well, they kind of work like hand traps sometimes. Kind of weird, but okay. So against those guys, Called by the Grave would stop them because they do discard themselves or send themselves to the graveyard where they're possible to Called by. But if you set the Called by, of course you cannot activate the Called by until next turn because it functions like a trap. If we were to just hold onto and activate Called by the Grave, I guess, during the main phase instead of doing set Called by as our first action, I think that's in general going to be your best option. It depends on exactly what you're playing against, though. The exact hand structure of your opponent, like their exact deck, your exact deck, the cards you have currently, yada yada, right? So set Called by is probably never the correct option, at least not immediately. You would have to attempt to make your play first, because setting Called by prevents you from using Called by on Ash Blossom, Joyous Spring, or like Max E. So if we look just in terms of our Called by here, there are 3 options. So if we just convert this to like a percentage, there is a 33% chance that you're making the correct play, assuming one of the plays is correct. And the amount of plays that are correct here can vary. So uh, let's say in this case, the only wrong answer is going to be to not activate called by and not set called by, because our opponent here is going to have, let's say, absolutely no response to anything we're doing. So it would be fine if we set called by at the start of the main phase, or if we were holding until end of main phase with the called by the grave, waiting for like a hand trap, and then we set it before we end our turn. Both of these options could be completely fine, but you would, let's say, need this called by the grave against your opponent's specific deck. Like, let's say it's Tearlament, and with the matchup called by the grave and their exact hand, uh, they will lose, but it won't be like a complete one-sided stomping, and you will actually need the called by in order to stop your opponent's plays and prevent yourself from getting OTK'd and your opponent from kind of getting out of control here. So actually, in this specific case, there's a 66% chance that things will go right for you here. But that's assuming you just randomly pick an option every single time, right? But in terms of logical plays, both of the plays we just listed were completely logical, right? Where we either just set called by, well, that's not fully logical, but we have set called by or hold called by and then set it later. We have those options, which you should go for like 100% of the time almost, and you should not really be going for the third play of holding called by for like an end phase hand trigger of some sort, which there are a few instances where it's useful, but yeah, in our example situation, it won't be useful though to do so. So in this case, it was actually an 100% chance that you were always winning this duel if we're just focusing on your decision making with called by the grave. But you know, this compounds, so we could make an example hand, but let's just say if we go by random probability like this, and you randomly select some sort of action to make, so that would be like setting a card, special summoning this card, or missequencing. All of that kind of adds up, and of course, bad play after bad play, you would be able to lose unless your opponent has like a completely horrendous unplayable hand where they wouldn't be able to beat like Sangam Beatdown, in which case it doesn't really matter too much what you're doing as long as you're going into the battle phase and attacking with Sangan. Like, as crazy as that sounds. Let's say maybe a losing play would be to normal summon Sangan and then link it off for Almiraj, and then this just gets like Ash Blossomed or something. And you have just a 0 attack guy and no way to get damage on the field anymore, and your opponent unbreaks on like their 9th draw in a row or something. Exactly, because their deck is stacked in like the worst way possible. I don't know, like for example with Blue Eyes, you technically do have that many dead draws, so draw Blue Eyes, draw Blue Eyes, draw Blue Eyes, field spell. So I don't have the field spell showing up here because it doesn't actually mention Blue Eyes. So in place of that, we'll just use Black Luster Soldier. So that is actually technically also a dead draw. And then we have potentially, I guess it could be like Ash Blossom, Blossom, Ash Blossom. So that's like 7 cards. And then top deck, like Called by the Grave, for example. And then you finally top deck, I don't know, a starter of some sort, like Sage with Eyes of Blue. And your starting hand is also just hand traps. I mean, it's not that likely to occur, but I mean, it's possible, technically. So your opponent could have like a terrible hand like that, and Sengen Beatdown would be fine, even if you fumbled like the rest of your hand for whatever reason. But if we're going by uh, your best plays and your best lines, if you take those, of course that will increase your odds, and you won't need your opponent to open like the one in what was that, like something like 1 in 100,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 1 million. It's just like not that likely to open this horrible, and then also have your deck stacked in such a terrible way. I mean, it can for sure happen. And of course, you could have hand traps and then they just only have one starter, and that starter just doesn't work against like your hand trap, I guess. So in this case, it could be like Maiden, so attempt to use Maiden to set True Light. It gets hit by Called by the Grave, and then you just don't draw a starter for a while. That's like almost reasonable, I guess. But yeah, if we just compound like the probabilities with what we did with Called by the Grave, though, your winning line, it could be like basically one in, I don't know. We'll just make up a number where we don't really have to do the math here because it's not really that important. But let's say you have a 1 in 1 million of just, or yeah, 1 in 1 million of just randomly stumbling into the correct line. If you just make essentially random actions to win any given like duel, like on average, if you're taking completely random actions. But if you're just playing knowing what the general right move is, it could go down to as far as like 1 in 2, 1 in 3. And the deciding factor at this point becomes things that are out of your control. So like winning or losing the coin flip, your hand quality, things like that. Like maybe you only run, let's say, 2 garnets or 2 bricks, but you always open them in hand. That's not really your fault, not the deck's fault. That, well, unless you count your luck as being your fault. But yeah, that's just a thing that happens sometimes. If it like happens an absurd amount of time, that's just unlucky. That's not something that's really controllable. So happens. Your opponent sometimes breaks, also happens. But for the most part, you just gotta improve your play. And this can be done by making mistakes. So let's say you do set Called by the Grave, and it was the incorrect answer, and you lose the game. I mean, the important thing is just realizing, oh, I shouldn't have done specifically this thing. And you just don't do that again, and then you'll improve, right? And eventually you'll get to the point where you're making the correct move most of the time. And you'll lose to more niche things like rulings and kind of suffering a little bit there, but that's fine, right? So, for example, we have this Blackwing ruling, which is freaky, that if you didn't know, that could be game losing. Like, let's say, for example, you saw Blackwing Full Armor Master, and you needed to out specifically Full Armor Master, but your opponent has Silverwind the Ascendant on the field, plus, let's say, Black Feather Whirlwind. So you just assumed with your 2 beaters, you could not remove Full Armor Master. And then Full Armor Master board wipe allows for, let's say, lethal via, what we'll say, some kind of extension. I don't know, it doesn't really matter what the extension is. It could be literally summoning 1 or 2 Blackwinged Assault Dragons. Maybe you got burned a bit, and then this is just enough for lethal. Just by running over your guys, I guess. Or I guess technically Black Feather Whirlwind protect your own guys on the next turn, and then like Blackwing Assault Dragon gets a counter removed, and then attack for battle, I guess. Attack over your opponent's guys in battle phase. That could be lethal, I suppose. But the correct answer was actually that you could run over Full Armor Master in this case, and you should have attempted to do so at least, because Blackwing Silverwind the Ascendant actually does not protect Full Armor Master for whatever reason. And if your opponent did not control Full Armor Master, they couldn't like take your monster and then detonate your board to set up lethal, let's say. And next turn we'll just assume they cannot bring back Full Armor Master in this case. So that is very much possible because you have, let's say, a some kind of bash card, not necessarily Called by the Grave, maybe just a Bestial you top decked on like turn 2, which I think is possible. So yeah, this is all just, things that could happen, but you would need to kind of know and kind of go through some trial and error. And I mean, eventually you will get to the right play, and there's more I could say on that, but making mistakes in general, like painting things wrong, sequencing things wrong, well, you have to kind of do things wrong in order to know that it is wrong, or to be able to do things better. Not necessarily correct, because who knows when you're doing something correct. Because with hidden information, if you actually had access to that, or like the benefit of hindsight, there's some insane plays that you wouldn't know would be the correct answer, right? So let's say, actually, on top of my deck is going to be Ash Blossom Joe's Ring, and I have just Called By. And if I attempt to do my combo here, I will actually lose the duel on the spot, because my opponent opens like nearly all hand traps, and on top of my opponent's deck is going to be a duplicate hand trap that cannot be activated. So let's say my opponent already has Ash Blossom Joe Spring, and their next top deck is Ash Blossom Joe Spring, but they have no engine, it's all hand trap. So the actual correct play in this specific game with my specific hand is, let's say, to pass the turn and then do nothing, don't even set a card, because my opponent has like Harpy's Feather Duster. And I would need just psychic powers to know this. Like my opponent's exact hands, their top decks, my top decks, because I will top deck, let's say, Crossout Designator, and I will then be able to actually do my combo after this point and attack for game the next turn. Maybe even through potentially a Maxi, I guess. So in this case, that would require knowledge of your opponent's deck, their hand, your deck. So it's like absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, that's not really the expectation here. The expectation is just to make the play that makes sense. So, just holding on to, I guess, Called by the Grave in this case. And then testing for hand trap, setting Called by. And then, I mean, there are a lot of plays that you do. Like that's just Called by the Grave, I guess. But, either way, we're just really holding out and trying to utilize our cards here to the best of our ability and in the best sequence that we can with the knowledge that we have. And by the knowledge we have, I mean like our opponent has 5 cards in hand, do they have triggers, yada yada, that type of info. And not so much my opponent has Ash Blossom Joe Spring on top of the deck, so if I actually don't play this turn, it's perfectly fine. And I just gain an additional turn if I just don't play kind of knowledge, which is not like normal at all. There are some types of plays where they are like a little bit more logical, like playing a certain combo or a certain sequence that is slightly suboptimal to play around like certain hand traps. Like that stuff's fine, but yeah, the pure passing, don't even set cards, that's in a league of its own. And honestly, if you're not cheating, that must have been a misclick. Like I don't know how else you would do this insane play, like crazy hell of a misclick to click on the change phase button and then end phase. But wait, don't you also have to click the yes button for if you want to leave the main phase? It's like 3 pretty insane misclicks, but hey, if it wins you the duel, I guess. But yeah, I mean, making mistakes, fine. Not learning from mistakes, that's bad. If you can just learn from your mistakes, that's good, right? There are only so many mistakes that you can make, and there are only so many like reasonable plays to make at some points in time. Maybe your decision to Ash Blossom a certain card was wrong. Maybe it never mattered at all because your opponent had Called by the Grave. But typically, if you have Ash Blossom, maybe there's a certain specific card against a certain deck that you should be hitting. Like with a pre-prep, maybe you should have not hit pre-prep because your opponent actually ratted out what deck they were playing, and pre-prep actually didn't matter in the certain matchup. Like, for example, Preparation of Rites, actually not that threatening versus like pre-prep. This could add like Habakiri, for example, which is problematic. Preparation of Rites, usually there are only 2 or 3 monsters that you would add off of Preparation of Rites. So to list them, I believe it would be Benten, Illusion of Chaos, or Mikanko Ohime. So with the exception of Benten, which is probably the most problematic to deal with out of these three, in my opinion. Illusion of Chaos, you don't even have to Ash, you just wait for whatever Illusion of Chaos adds, and then presumably it could be like a normal summon or attempted effect of Magician Souls. You could negate any of those with Ash Blossom, and that would be better in a lot of cases. And then with Ohime, you can just Ash Ohime, and then that can just be fine. I believe Ohime might discard for effect and not cost. I mean, we can check. Reveal this card and then discard for effect at the very end of the effector. Yeah, so I mean, you can Ash this because it's like the only Makanko searching card. So ashing that, fine, because we have the idea of Ohime adding ceremony, special summoning itself, and that's still like interruption. But the other thing you're worried about is going to be Makanko Water Arabesque. So just ash one of those two cards, basically. There's a good chance you can do that. Or if you're being really patient, you could ash Hare the Sword Makanko, I suppose. The reason you would ash like Water Arabesque is to prevent the Hare search anyways. And I mean, it could be case by case. Like, I could give examples for why an ash on one of these different cards in different scenarios would be the correct target, but it's about knowing your resources and your opponent's resources and when to like use your resources if you're able to, or if you're better off holding onto it. So for example, you know that Makanko likes to play Lava Golem. So maybe a correct play would be to actually only end on one monster on your end board, which is crazy talk if you ask me, but it's a play you could do in theory, because if you drop like 2 guys on your end board normally, then your end board is just gone immediately, no response. But that's like cheating level of stuff, but I think just knowing when to hit with Ash Blossom Joe Spring is a lot more normal here. And let's say the losing play is maybe ashing the prep or maybe ashing the Ohime. I mean, it depends on the exact game and how things go. But yeah, prep usually should be the wrong answer in terms of what you're ashing here. But there is actually a situation where ashing the prep is correct. So we have activate the prep Ohime effect, Ash Ohime effect, and then we have activating the Great Makanko Ceremony to attempt to special summon Ohime. I believe, well, don't quote me on this for sure, but a lot of people should be playing the Great Makanko Ceremony as a one of. So the odds of your opponent actually having this is like 1 in 10, but if they do have it, then you should have actually prevented access to the Ohime, assuming they did not have Ohime already, which it is possible that they had prep Ohime and Makanko Ceremony as their hand. But, you know, in that case, if we know this, then Ohime is not the card we ash in this scenario. It would be actually allowing your opponent into Ohime in the first place. and then they just don't have a target for like the Great Makako Ceremony, and they don't get to attempt the Ohime search either. So yeah, I mean, case by case, and there's some reasonable and some unreasonable actions to take sometimes. So yeah, just know when it's a mistake, know when you're just simply unlucky. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.